"You will die in this nursing home," said the millionaire's son to his elderly mother as he shoved her out of the house. The next day, he was stunned to wake up to 3 black cars parked right outside at his door. Can you imagine the chilling betrayal of waking up to realize the person you loved most, your own son, wasn't just taking your home, but was actively trying to take your life? Because that's exactly what happened to Dorothy, and her story is a powerful reminder that justice sometimes finds a way, even in the darkest of corners. So, picture this: a sprawling mansion, sunlight streaming through those huge windows, bouncing off ancient Persian rugs and priceless art. It screamed wealth, elegance. But beneath it all, there was this suffocating tension you could practically taste. In the middle of it all was Dorothy, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, moving with such painful slowness. Her eyes, once so vibrant, now just looked tired, but still held this faint spark of kindness that neither age nor heartbreak had managed to extinguish. Her hands, calloused from a lifetime of work, trembled as she held a silver tea tray, a family heirloom for generations. "I made your favorite tea, my son. The special leaves your father always loved when he needed to think clearly," she murmured, her voice sweet, placing the delicate porcelain cup beside a stack of papers her son, Russell, was practically devouring with his eyes. Russell didn't even glance up. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, in a suit that looked sewn onto him. His black hair, just a touch of gray at the temples, was slicked back, showing off these sharp, angular features that could have been attractive if not for the absolute coldness radiating from him. His eyes, the same brown as his mother's, held none of her warmth. They were calculating, pragmatic, like he was constantly sizing up everyone and everything around him. His perfectly manicured fingers drummed impatiently on the documents, even though he probably knew every single comma on those pages already. "I don't have time for tea, Mother. I have important matters to resolve, and honestly, you're just bothering me with these unnecessary formalities." He finally looked up, his irritation barely disguised, just a thin veil over outright contempt. Dorothy's eyes flickered with sadness. Just for a second. Then she hid it with a resigned smile. This wasn't the boy she'd poured her heart and soul into raising. Her mind drifted back, seeing him at 6 years old, scraped knees, tears streaming after a bike fall. She remembered rushing to him, humming a lullaby as she cleaned his wounds. How he'd cling to her during thunderstorms. The sleepless nights she pulled after her husband died, working overtime, skipping meals just so Russell would never go without. "Forgive me. I just thought you might like something to drink while you work. You always used to love my tea," she whispered, stepping back, gripping the tray tighter to hide the tremor intensifying in her hands. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the relentless ticking of an antique clock. Dorothy stood there, waiting, as if for permission to leave, while Russell went back to his papers. The tension ratcheted up, filling the room with a grim sense of foreboding that tightened her chest. She knew her son. She knew that look, that mix of impatience and disdain, when he was about to deliver news he knew would hurt someone. He never saw human feelings, just irritating inconveniences. "I sold the house." He dropped it. No preamble, no softening. Just like commenting on the weather. Dorothy felt the floor vanish beneath her. The tray wobbled precariously, porcelain clinking. Her eyes widened in pure shock, her breath catching in her throat. For a second, she thought she'd misheard. Maybe her ears were playing tricks, as they sometimes did. But the resolute, cold look on Russell's face confirmed it. She'd heard correctly. You sold our house? But how could you? Without consulting me? This mansion, your father built it for us with so much love." Her voice was broken, surprise and a spreading, venomous pain tearing through her. Russell sighed, a sound of pure exasperation, as if explaining the obvious to a slow child. There was no remorse, no compassion in his eyes as he looked at his vulnerable mother. Only a calculating coldness that would have terrified her if she wasn't already so utterly devastated. "Business isn't going well, Mother. I need immediate liquidity, and this house is too valuable an asset to just sit here while we face financial difficulties," he explained with cruel rationality. Besides, you're far too old to live alone in this huge place. It's time to consider alternatives more suitable to your condition. Every word was a needle piercing her fragile heart. This house wasn't just property. It was her entire life. Every corner held a memory. The bedroom where she'd watched Russell sleep, the kitchen where she made countless family meals, the garden where her late husband had planted roses that still bloomed every spring, a promise of eternal love. These walls had witnessed joys, sorrows, beginnings, farewells. It wasn't just a roof, it was a sanctuary of memories she revisited daily, finding comfort in her solitude. But where will I go? This is my home. The place where I spent my entire adult life, where I raised you, where your father and I built our family. Tears finally streamed down her wrinkled face. All my memories are here. Russell rose, a fluid movement, adjusting his jacket. His imposing posture seemed to shrink Dorothy even further. There was an impatience in his every move, like this conversation was an annoying entry on his packed schedule. He walked to the window, gazing at the expansive garden with an appraising eye, already calculating the profit. I've already found a perfectly suitable place for you. It's a cozy establishment, with people your age, and professionals who can take care of all your needs, he said, carefully choosing his words to mask the ugly truth. You won't have to worry about maintaining a large house, or about loneliness. It's the best solution for everyone. A chill snaked down Dorothy's spine. She knew that tone. It was the same one Russell used in negotiations when he wanted someone to accept an unfavorable deal. She might not understand finance, but she understood manipulation. Something about his description of this cozy place sparked an instinctive dread. Not just fear of change, but a terrifying certainty that her own son was plotting something not for her benefit. When will I have to leave? I need time to organize my things, to say goodbye to this place, she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the desperation churning inside. Russell ostentatiously checked his expensive wristwatch, as if counting the minutes wasted. His face wore a facade of concern that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He approached Dorothy, placing his hands on her fragile shoulders. It might have looked affectionate to a casual observer, but she felt it as another act. The new owners want the house vacated by tomorrow. I've already arranged a team to pack your essential belongings. Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of all the details, he said with that fake solicitude. Tomorrow I'll take you to your new home. Trust me, Mother, I'm doing this for your own good. Before Dorothy could fully process this, before she could even gather the strength to protest, the click-clack of high heels on marble announced Brittany's arrival. The young woman swept into the room with the easy familiarity of someone who already considered herself mistress of the house. Barely 30, Brittany was the epitome of calculated beauty, perfectly dyed blonde hair, flawless makeup, a body sculpted by the gym and subtle surgeries, and a smile that never quite reached her shrewd eyes. She wore a tight dress that probably cost more than Dorothy's monthly budget used to be. Her strong perfume filled the air, drowning out the gentle scent of tea. Hello, dear Dorothy. How are you feeling today? Brittany chirped, her sweetness as artificial as her nails. Russell told me about the new plans. I'm sure you'll love the new place, much more suitable for someone in your condition. A wave of nausea washed over Dorothy as she caught the complicit glance Brittany exchanged with Russell. It was like they shared a private joke at her expense, a silent conspiracy where she was the target, and the only one excluded. The tray in her hand felt impossibly heavy, as if the weight of the entire horrific situation had materialized in that object. With an almost superhuman effort, she managed to place it on the side table without dropping anything. If you'll excuse me, I need to withdraw for a moment, Dorothy muttered, unable to endure this farce of concern any longer. I apparently need to start sorting through my things. Russell made a dismissive gesture of agreement, clearly relieved to end the awkward conversation. The moment Dorothy left the room, her steps faltering, the mask of false consideration shattered, replaced by a malicious grin. Brittany immediately wrapped her arm around his, speaking in a low voice, but not low enough to go unheard. Did she believe your story? Brittany asked, her eyes gleaming with barely disguised ambition. She seems quite shaken. Russell chuckled softly, a sound devoid of genuine joy, only cruel satisfaction. He pulled Brittany closer, whispering, sharing a precious secret, his eyes fixed on the hallway, making sure his mother was truly out of earshot. Tomorrow, we'll get rid of her and finally have access to that safe the old man hid. He purred with perverse satisfaction. My father was always too suspicious, keeping secrets even from me. But now, with the old woman out of the way, I'll have access to everything that belongs to me by right. What they didn't realize was Dorothy hadn't gone far. Something in her maternal instinct, the same instinct that had so often caught Russell in a lie as a child, made her stop. She'd partially hidden behind the half-open door. Sometimes, age brought not just physical limitations, but wisdom born from experience. And Dorothy knew her son too well not to suspect his true intentions. Hearing those cruel words, Dorothy felt an invisible fist squeeze her heart. The pain was so intense, so overwhelming, she thought for a moment it was purely emotional, the suffering of a mother betrayed by her own son. But then she knew it was something more serious, something physical and terrifyingly real. A tightness in her chest, radiating to her left arm, a pressure that made each breath a monumental effort. She brought a trembling hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat erratically, painfully. Her vision began to blur, not just from the tears now freely falling, but from something far more concerning. The world spun. She had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. With a superhuman effort, driven by pure survival instinct, she managed to silently stumble away, down the hallway, toward her room. My medicine. I need my medicine, she gasped, her voice barely audible, fighting to stay conscious. Each step was a battle against searing pain and weakness. She knew these symptoms. It wasn't the first time her fragile heart had protested intense emotions, but never like this. The doctor had warned her about stress, about taking her medication regularly. Your heart is tired, Mrs. Dorothy, he'd said. We need to care for it with all affection. Finally reaching her room, Dorothy went straight to the bedside table where she kept her pills. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the small bottle. When she finally gripped it, a fresh wave of despair crashed over her. She shook it. No familiar rattle of pills. With mounting panic, she opened the bottle, inverted it. Empty. Completely empty. It cannot be. I got a new box at the pharmacy last week, she whispered, confused and terrified. In that terrible moment of clarity, Dorothy understood. It hadn't been forgetfulness. She remembered how Russell had insisted on helping her with her medications recently, claiming concern for her fragile memory. He'd offered to organize them to prevent confusion. And she, touched by that rare, apparent gesture of consideration, had allowed it. Reality slammed into Dorothy with overwhelming cruelty. Her own son had deliberately removed her vital medication, probably hoping this exact thing would happen. It wasn't just her house and her memories Russell wanted to take. It was her very life. The pain in her chest intensified with this horrifying realization. She staggered to her bed, collapsing onto the mattress, gasping for each breath. My God, what has my son become? She asked herself in a broken sigh as darkness began to creep into her peripheral vision. In her last lucid moments before unconsciousness mercifully enveloped her, Dorothy thought of her deceased husband. He'd always been suspicious of Russell's excessive ambition. Our Russell has my talent for business, but he doesn't have your heart, Henry used to say. One day, I fear that will destroy him and everyone around him. With surprising clarity for someone on the verge of fainting, Dorothy knew she would need all her strength and cunning to survive. Not just her son's betrayal, but the crucial hours ahead. I won't give up without a fight, was her last conscious thought before the world vanished, swallowed by a black veil of pain and absence. The gloomy corridor of the nursing home stretched endlessly, its peeling walls painted a faded green that looked more like an abandoned hospital than a place of care. Fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows like specters. The strong smell of cheap disinfectant mixed with other, less identifiable odors, creating an oppressive atmosphere. Identical doors lined both sides, some ajar, revealing glimpses of lives reduced to metal beds and sparse belongings. From one room, the muffled sound of an old television blared soap operas, cranked to compensate for the residents' hearing loss. From another, the unintelligible murmur of someone conversing with unseen interlocutors. Amid it all, occasional screams of pain or calls for help echoed, often ignored by the facility's overburdened staff. "Doctor, she's finally waking up. Should I call her son?" He left specific instructions to be informed. A young, hesitant voice asked, as if unsure it was the right thing to do. In the tiny room at the end of the corridor, Dorothy slowly opened her eyes. Each eyelid felt like it weighed a ton. The dim light filtering through the yellowed curtains revealed the room's dismal state: a metal bed with a mattress too thin for comfort, moisture-stained walls, a small wardrobe with one door hanging precariously, and a nightstand with a half-empty glass of water. Brownish stains from leaks patterned the ceiling, seeming to accuse whoever lay beneath them. The broken ceramic floor was clean, but showed decades of wear and insufficient maintenance. The air carried that institutional smell: medications, industrial disinfectant, and an indescribable essence of abandonment, permeating places where people are sent to be forgotten. Where am I? What happened?" Dorothy muttered, her voice hoarse and confused, trying to orient herself. "This isn't my home. Russell, can someone tell me what's going on?" A young nurse, Lindsay, quickly approached the bed. She couldn't have been more than 25, with a gentle face framed by dark hair tied in a practical bun. Her hands, though worn from harsh cleaning products, moved delicately as she adjusted Dorothy's pillows. There was a genuine compassion in her eyes, a stark contrast to the professional indifference of most staff here. Her impeccably clean white uniform seemed out of place in this scene of neglect, as if Lindsay herself were an anomaly of care in a system designed for forgetting. "Easy, Mrs. Dorothy. You're at Golden Rest Nursing Home. Your son brought you in during the night. You fainted at home, and he brought you here so we could take care of you. My name is Lindsay, I'm one of the nurses here," she explained softly, checking Dorothy's pulse. "How are you feeling now? Are you in any pain?" The confusion on Dorothy's face gradually morphed into understanding, then horror. Memories of the previous night flashed back: Russell's cold announcement, his cruelty to Brittany, the empty medication bottle, the searing chest pain. None of it had been a nightmare. This was her new reality. Her eyes scanned the deteriorated room, absorbing every detail with growing despair. This wasn't a hospital. It was something far worse, something she'd feared in the past when she heard stories of elderly people abandoned by their families. A low-cost nursing home. A place where people were deposited when they became inconvenient. A place to die forgotten. "No, there must be some mistake. I shouldn't be here. My son is trying to get rid of me to take possession of our house, our assets. He brought me here without my consent. I need to leave immediately. I need to talk to someone. Call the police," Dorothy cried, trying to sit up, immediately overcome by dizziness that pushed her back against the pillows. Lindsay exchanged a quick glance with another staff member passing by the door. A look Dorothy caught and understood instantly. It was the look people exchange when they hear what they consider the delusions of an elderly, confused mind. The nurse adjusted the sheet over Dorothy with an understanding, but condescending smile. Her tone was one used with an agitated child, or someone whose sanity is questioned. "Mrs. Dorothy, your son Russell explained everything to us. You had an episode of mental confusion at home, which is common for people your age. He brought you here so we could properly care for you, since he cannot offer the specialized attention you need. It was all done with your well-being in mind," Lindsay said, clearly repeating what she'd been instructed to say. "The admission documents were all properly filled out and signed." The feeling of powerlessness that washed over Dorothy was more crushing than any physical pain she'd ever known. She was trapped. Her own son had effectively kidnapped her from her home and deposited her in this desolate place, probably with a convincing story about her supposed senility. And worst of all, nobody would believe her. How many times had she herself heard similar stories and thought, sadly, but without surprise, that it was probably just a case of mental confusion. The cruel perfection of Russell's plan hit her full force. Who would credit the word of an apparently confused old woman against that of a respected businessman, concerned about his aging mother's well-being? My belongings, my clothes, my documents, my medications, where are they? I need them, especially my heart medication, Dorothy asked, trying to maintain calm and lucidity, knowing any excessive display of emotion would only reinforce the image of instability Russell had painted. Lindsay hesitated, her gaze softening. There was something in the clarity of Dorothy's eyes, the precise articulation of her words, that didn't match the profile of mental confusion Russell had described. The young nurse had worked long enough here to recognize the real signs of dementia or confusion, and Dorothy displayed none of them. On the contrary, despite the evident shock, her thoughts were coherent, her memories perfectly functional. You arrived with only the clothes on your back, without any documents or personal belongings. Your son mentioned he would bring some basic things later today. As for medications, we have a doctor who makes weekly visits here. He can evaluate you and prescribe whatever is necessary, Lindsay replied, carefully observing Dorothy's reaction. Do you remember which medicines you take regularly? I can write them down for the doctor. Dorothy closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the wave of despair that threatened to engulf her. Without her documents, without her essential medications, without any means of contact with the outside world, Russell had thought of everything. The absence of her most basic belongings wasn't an oversight. It was part of a meticulous plan to isolate her completely, to erase her identity and autonomy, reducing her to just another anonymous elderly woman in a decaying nursing home. My heart medication is vital. Without it, Dorothy didn't finish the sentence. But the meaning hung in the air between them like a dark presence. Please, I need you to believe me. I'm not confused. My son is plotting something terrible. I heard him talking with his girlfriend about getting rid of me to access a safe deposit box my late husband left. He intentionally emptied my medication bottles. This isn't paranoia. It's the truth. Something in the intensity of Dorothy's gaze, in the consistency of her story, in the precision of her details, made Lindsay momentarily doubt the version she'd received. The nurse had witnessed similar scenes before, wealthy families depositing elderly relatives in this godforsaken place, often motivated by inheritance disputes, or simply the inconvenience of caring for an aging relative. But there was always something in the old people's stories that sounded disconnected, fragmented, mixing facts with confabulations. Dorothy's narrative, on the other hand, was frighteningly coherent. I'll see what I can do, Mrs. Dorothy. Perhaps we can consult your previous medical records to confirm your medications. For now, try to rest, Lindsay said, adjusting Dorothy's pillow and lowering her voice to an almost inaudible whisper. And don't worry. Not everyone here thinks you're confused. I've noticed your lucidity. The following hours dragged on with torturous slowness for Dorothy. Confined to that tiny room, she alternated between periods of absolute despair and moments of iron determination. Her mind, still sharp despite her age, worked incessantly, seeking a way out of the trap so carefully constructed by her own son. Every noise in the hallway made her stiffen, fearing, and simultaneously hoping for Russell's visit. She needed to confront him, to try and understand how the boy she'd raised with so much love could have transformed into a calculating monster, capable of practically sentencing his own mother to death. I can't give up now. I still have the strength to fight. I can still find someone who believes me, Dorothy murmured to herself, clinging to hope like a castaway to a piece of driftwood. If only I could contact Anthony, my husband's old lawyer and friend. The sound of firm footsteps in the corridor interrupted her thoughts. These weren't Lindsay's light, hurried steps, nor the dragging of tired feet from other staff. These were decisive steps, of someone accustomed to making his way through the world with the certainty of one who never encounters obstacles. Dorothy knew that sound well. It was Russell approaching. For a brief moment, she felt a wave of dread, but it was quickly replaced by a surprising determination. This could be her only moment to confront him, to try to make him reconsider, or at least to understand the true dimensions of the danger she was in. "Hello, Mother. How are you adapting to your new home?" Russell asked as he entered the room, carrying a small plastic bag that he disinterestedly deposited on the bed. "I brought some basic clothes and hygiene items. I didn't go overboard with details. After all, your needs now are quite simple." Russell seemed even more imposing in that degraded environment, like a king visiting the most miserable of dungeons. His expensive suit and refined perfume contrasted violently with the decay of the nursing home, creating a visual dissonance that only accentuated the cruelty of the situation. He maintained a polite smile, but his eyes remained cold and calculating, examining his mother as one would evaluate a problem about to be solved. He had closed the door upon entering, ensuring no one could hear their conversation, a detail that didn't go unnoticed by Dorothy. "Why are you doing this to me, Russell? What did I do to deserve such treatment from my own son?" Dorothy asked directly, her voice surprisingly firm, despite her body's fragility. "All I ever did was love you unconditionally. Sacrifice my life for your happiness." A dry, humorless laugh escaped Russell's lips. He pulled the room's only chair and sat down, crossing his legs with studied elegance. For a moment, his face displayed something close to sincerity, a rare window into his true thoughts, usually hidden beneath layers of dissimulation. "Love unconditionally? Sacrifices? Is that what you call raising a child under the constant shadow of a father who never trusted him? Do you have any idea what it was like growing up knowing my own father kept secrets from me, setting traps and contingencies as if I were an enemy and not his only heir?" he retorted, a trace of genuine bitterness permeating his usually controlled voice. "But that doesn't matter anymore. Business is business, and you've become an obstacle to my ambitions." Dorothy watched her son with a mixture of horror and deep sadness. For the first time, she glimpsed the extent of the distortion in Russell's mind. Somehow, he had rewritten the history of his own childhood, transforming his father's care and prudence into distrust, love into manipulation. The fault wasn't just Russell's. Perhaps she and her husband had made mistakes they hadn't realized, wounds they never saw heal properly. "Your father loved you deeply, Russell. If he took precautions, it was because he knew the temptations that wealth can bring. He wanted to protect you, not punish you," Dorothy explained, trying to reach some remnant of the boy she had raised. "We can still resolve this as a family. It's not too late." Russell rose abruptly, all pretense of civility vanishing. He approached the bed with determined steps, leaning until his face was inches from his mother's. His eyes no longer hid the contempt and cruelty within him. "It's been too late for years, Mother. The mansion has already been sold. The contract signed this morning. I already have access to all the family bank accounts, thanks to the power of attorney you naively granted me when you began to feel too tired to deal with bureaucracies," he revealed, savoring each word like a predator savoring its prey's fear. "And that secret safe in the office? I found it 3 days ago, hidden exactly where I suspected all these years." Dorothy's blood froze. The office safe contained not only important documents and valuables, but also the alternative will her husband had prepared, anticipating exactly this type of situation. A document that would effectively disinherit Russell if he tried to harm Dorothy or irresponsibly squander the family patrimony. The alternative will?" she asked, unable to hide the fear in her voice. Russell's smile widened, revealing an almost predatory satisfaction. He sat back in the chair, now completely at ease, like a king contemplating a newly conquered kingdom. "Burned. Every page, every contingency my father created to control me beyond the grave, all reduced to ashes," he answered with terrifying calm. "It's fascinating how quickly fire consumes paper, isn't it? In minutes, decades of planning disappeared forever." Dorothy felt that invisible hand squeeze her chest again. Her last fragment of hope had been cruelly torn away. Without the alternative will, without documents, without witnesses, she was completely at her son's mercy. The question that escaped her lips was no longer about a solution. It was about understanding. "Why not simply wait? I'm an elderly woman, Russell. My remaining years are few. Why not just let nature take its course? She questioned, trying to comprehend the depth of her son's cruelty. Russell stood again, this time walking to the small window. He briefly looked out at the cracked concrete courtyard where some elderly people in wheelchairs were left in the sun, like wilting plants waiting for water that would never come. When he turned to Dorothy again, there was no longer any pretense in his expression. Because I have no time to waste, Mother. Each day with you alive is a day when something could go wrong. Someone might discover the existence of that will. Some old friend of the old man might show up asking inconvenient questions. He explained with brutal frankness. Besides, your fragile heart needs expensive medications, constant care, resources. I prefer to invest in my future, not in prolonging your past. The naked cruelty in Russell's words hit Dorothy like a physical blow. It wasn't just greed or resentment. It was something deeper, more disturbing, a fundamental absence of empathy, an inability to recognize the value of human life, especially the life of the one who had brought him into the world. You will die in this nursing home, Russell continued, approaching again, his voice lowering to a venomous whisper. Nobody will believe a confused old woman. Your new medications? Placebos. Your story about a cruel son abandoning his elderly mother? Dementia delusions. Your requests for help? Senile confusion. In a week, maybe two, your heart will simply stop, and I'll arrange a modest but dignified funeral. The devoted son, devastated by the loss of his dear mother after a long battle against age and mental confusion. Dorothy looked at her son, truly looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. There was no longer any trace of the boy she had loved, of the young man she had raised. In his place was a stranger with her son's face, a man consumed by ambition and empty of humanity. I understand now, Dorothy said softly, a surprising calmness enveloping her. You are no longer my son. My son died at some point, and I didn't notice. And you took his place. May God have mercy on your soul, Russell, because you will have no peace with what you're doing. Something in Dorothy's tranquility seemed to disturb Russell more than any protest or plea. He expected fear, despair, perhaps even anger, emotions that would fuel his sense of power and control. His mother's serene acceptance, almost like a final blessing, destabilized his carefully constructed balance. Keep your superstitions to yourself, old woman. God, if he exists, is clearly on my side so far, he retorted, quickly composing himself and walking toward the door. I won't visit you again. The next news I'll have will be of your death. Goodbye, Mother. With those cruel words, Russell left the room, firmly closing the door behind him. In the hallway, he passed by Lindsay without even noticing her, as if the young nurse were just another insignificant object in that scene of misery. His posture was that of a man who had concluded an unpleasant but necessary business, walking toward a bright future built on the ruins of his past. Inside the room, Dorothy remained motionless for long minutes, fully absorbing the reality of her situation. There was no more room for denial or naive hope. Her own son had effectively sentenced her to death, meticulously planning every detail so it would seem natural and inevitable. The pain in her chest returned, sharper this time, accompanied by a sensation of weakness that rapidly spread throughout her body. I can't give up now. I need to find a way, she murmured, struggling to remain conscious as darkness began to invade her peripheral vision again. Lindsay. I need to speak with Lindsay. The sound of the door opening brought a last glimpse of hope before darkness completely enveloped her. Lindsay entered hurriedly, her young face contorted in genuine concern upon seeing Dorothy collapsing on the bed. The nurse rushed to her side, checking her vital signs with efficiency born of experience. Dr. Mitchell. I need Dr. Mitchell immediately. Lindsay shouted into the hallway while trying to stabilize Dorothy. Hold on, Mrs. Dorothy. Don't give up now. I believe you. Lindsay's words were the last thing Dorothy heard before completely submerging into unconsciousness. Her body had reached its limit, deprived of essential medications and subjected to devastating emotional stress. As darkness enveloped her, one thought persisted. If this was to be her end, it would not be the end Russell had planned. Somehow, the truth needed to come to light. Hours later, in the small, improvised office of the nursing home, Dr. Mitchell finished examining Dorothy, now stabilized but still unconscious. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes that had witnessed more suffering than they would have liked. His grave expression as he removed the stethoscope left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. Lindsay anxiously awaited his diagnosis, her concern going beyond professional obligation. "The situation is serious, Lindsay. Her heart is extremely compromised," the doctor explained, rubbing his tired eyes. "The initial tests confirm what she mentioned. She needs specific medication for her heart, a continuous treatment that was clearly abruptly interrupted." Lindsay bit her lip, hesitating before expressing her fears. "Doctor, she insists that her son brought her here against her will, that he deliberately deprived her of her medications. At first I thought it might be confusion, but now, I don't know. She seems perfectly lucid." The doctor nodded gravely, observing the results of the initial tests with a somber expression. He had seen similar cases throughout his career. Elderly people abandoned by families interested only in their assets, patients whose death would be convenient for impatient heirs. Usually, however, there was at least the pretense of care, a facade of concern. In this case, the complete absence of essential medications suggested something more sinister. Without the specific medication for her heart, she has at most a week to live, the doctor finally declared, his voice heavy with the weight of the prognosis. "And that medication is extremely expensive." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with implications either dared to fully verbalize. Dorothy's fate seemed sealed, abandoned in a decaying nursing home, deprived of her vital medications, without documents or means to prove her identity, at the mercy of a system that rarely questioned the stories told by seemingly concerned relatives. Unless something extraordinary happened, Russell's cruel plan would work perfectly. "We need to do something, Doctor. We can't simply let her die," Lindsay said, determination replacing helplessness in her voice. "She deserves more than this. Everyone does." Dr. Mitchell looked long at the young nurse, seeing in her the compassion and idealism that he himself had once possessed before years of working in precarious conditions eroded his hope. For a moment, a spark of that old determination rekindled in his tired chest. "We'll do what we can with what we have available," he finally responded, putting away his stethoscope with a heavy sigh. "And meanwhile, perhaps it's time to question the story we were told by this apparently devoted son." The weak late afternoon light entered through the stained windows of the nursing home, projecting elongated shadows through the gloomy corridors. In her room, Dorothy remained unconscious, her weak and irregular breathing the only sign that life had not completely abandoned her fragile body. Her fate hung by a thin thread, now depending on the intervention of strangers who, moved by compassion and a sense of justice, decided to question the seemingly unquestionable. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, Russell toasted with Brittany in an exclusive restaurant, celebrating the apparent success of his perfect plan, completely oblivious to the small spark of resistance beginning to form in the unlikely setting of a decaying nursing home. A spark that, fueled by the determination of a young nurse and the resilience of a lady who refused to be just another silent victim, had the potential to grow into a fire that would consume all his carefully elaborated plans. "To our new life," he said, raising his glass of expensive champagne. "To justice," murmured Lindsay in the nursing home, placing a damp compress on Dorothy's forehead. "It always finds a way, even in the most unlikely places." Lindsay's small apartment was on the third floor of an old building without an elevator on the outskirts of the city. It was modest, with peeling paint and simple furniture, but clean and organized, reflecting the young nurse's meticulous personality. The evening light streamed through the living room window, casting long shadows on the coffee table where Lindsay had spread newspaper clippings and notes. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed on her worn laptop, tirelessly researching Dorothy's family. Her eyes burned after hours glued to the screen, but her determination didn't waver. The image of the elderly woman, fragile and abandoned, fueled an indignation that grew with each new discovery about the respected businessman who had been Dorothy's husband. "I can't believe nobody questioned Russell's story," How can they simply accept that a perfectly lucid lady is confused just because her son said so? Lindsay muttered to herself, massaging her aching temples. If only I could find someone who knew the family well. Lindsay took another sip of her now cold coffee and continued her search. Finally, just as she was about to give up, she found a small note in an old newspaper. A photo of Dorothy's wedding decades ago, and in the background, a young maid. The caption mentioned, "The faithful Beatrice, with the family for more than 2 decades." With renewed vigor, Lindsay expanded her search, cross-referencing data until she found an address. Without a second thought, she wrote it down, grabbed her purse. The clock on the wall read almost midnight, but the urgency didn't allow waiting until dawn. Dorothy had only days without her medication, and every hour was precious. She trusted me when she said she wasn't confused. I can't fail her now, Lindsay decided, closing her apartment door with determination. It's our only chance to discover the truth before it's too late. The taxi dropped Lindsay off in front of a small house in the suburbs with a well-kept garden, despite the simplicity of the building. She hesitated for a moment before knocking, aware of the late hour and the strangeness of her visit. But when the porch light flickered on and a gray-haired lady with a stern expression answered, Lindsay instantly knew she had found the right person. Beatrice, the family's former housekeeper, seemed to have aged with the same dignity and strength that had characterized her entire life. Her eyes, though marked by deep wrinkles, maintained a vivacity and intelligence that immediately recognized the urgency in the unknown visitor's expression. "I know it's late and must seem strange, but my name is Lindsay. I'm a nurse at Golden Rest Nursing Home, and I need to talk to you about Dorothy," Lindsay explained hastily before the door could be closed. "She's in danger, and I think you're the only person who can help her." At Dorothy's name, Beatrice's countenance instantly transformed. A mixture of concern and alertness replaced the initial distrust, and without a word, she opened the door wider, inviting Lindsay in. The simple but impeccably arranged living room contained several framed photographs, and Lindsay immediately recognized the younger Dorothy in many of them, always with a gentle smile that painfully contrasted with the elderly woman's current situation. Beatrice gestured for Lindsay to sit, and after a moment of evaluative silence, spoke with a surprisingly firm voice. "So Russell finally did what his father always feared. I've been waiting for this visit for years, praying it would never come," Beatrice said, her eyes fixed on an old photograph where a tall, dignified man, presumably Dorothy's husband, smiled beside his wife. "Tell me everything, without omitting any detail. What has that wretch done to my dear Dorothy?" During the next hour, Lindsay recounted in detail the situation at the nursing home, Dorothy's condition, Russell's visits, and the revelations Dorothy had shared. With each word, Beatrice's face hardened, a contained fury growing behind her experienced eyes. When Lindsay finished, mentioning the doctor's diagnosis and the little time Dorothy had without proper medication, Beatrice rose abruptly, heading to a small wooden chest in a corner of the room. With precise movements, she extracted an old key from the bottom of a modest jewelry box. "Mr. Henry, Dorothy's husband, was an extraordinarily intelligent man. He knew his own son better than anyone, and he knew this day might come," Beatrice explained, holding the key as if it were a sacred relic. "Days before he died, he called me privately and entrusted me with a secret. He had created a contingency plan to protect Dorothy in case Russell one day attempted what it seems he has finally tried." Lindsay watched attentively as Beatrice revealed details that confirmed her suspicions about Russell and offered unexpected hope. According to the former housekeeper, Henry had created a second will, much more detailed and specific than the official one. This document, hidden in a secret compartment in the mansion's office, stipulated that the family fortune could only be managed by Russell if he properly cared for Dorothy. Otherwise, everything would be transferred to a foundation with Dorothy as president, and Russell completely disinherited. "Henry always said that Russell had his talent for business, but not Dorothy's heart," Beatrice commented with a sad, reminiscent smile. "He hoped he would never need to activate this plan, but he'd prepared everything meticulously. I have a copy of the mansion key and know the exact location of the secret compartment." With growing hope, Lindsay and Beatrice carefully planned their incursion into the mansion. Timing was crucial. Russell had mentioned he had already sold the property, but the new owners probably hadn't moved in yet. This would be their only opportunity to recover the document that could save Dorothy. As they discussed the practical details, Lindsay couldn't help but admire the strength and loyalty of the former housekeeper, who had kept that secret for so many years, always vigilant, always ready to act when necessary. "Why did Mr. Henry entrust this secret to you and not to a lawyer?" asked Lindsay, genuinely curious about this piece of the puzzle. Beatrice smiled, a smile that carried decades of untold stories and unbreakable loyalties. Her eyes shone with an intensity that transformed her wrinkled face, momentarily revealing the young woman she had been when she began working for the family. "Because I was more than a maid to them. I was a witness to their lives for 30 years. I saw Dorothy shed tears when she thought no one was looking. Watched Russell grow and change. Noticed every small sign that Henry recognized, but pretended not to see to avoid hurting Dorothy," she replied, with the wisdom of someone who observes others' lives so closely that she becomes an invisible part of it. "Henry trusted me because I was the only person who knew his family as well as he did himself." The following night, the plan was put into action. The imposing mansion was partially lit, with some security guards hired by Russell patrolling the perimeter, clearly a precaution until the sale finalized. Lindsay, dressed completely in black, her heart racing, followed Beatrice through an almost invisible side entrance, hidden by well-trimmed bushes. The old key worked perfectly in the rusty lock, and soon the two women found themselves inside, moving like shadows through corridors familiar to Beatrice and completely new to Lindsay. "We must be extremely quiet. Russell hired these guards for a reason. He must suspect there are documents he hasn't found yet," Beatrice whispered, guiding Lindsay through a labyrinth of luxurious rooms. "The office is at the end of this corridor. The secret compartment is hidden behind a specific painting, a portrait of Dorothy when she was young." Each step was calculated. The adrenaline amplified all sounds for Lindsay, the creaking of the floor, the distant murmur of the guards, her own pounding heart. Beatrice moved with surprising agility, guiding them with the familiarity of someone who knew every corner. In the elegant office, Lindsay admired the shelves with leather-bound books and the heavy wooden desk. "This feels like something out of a spy movie," Lindsay whispered while Beatrice methodically examined the paintings. Beatrice soon located the portrait of young Dorothy in a light blue dress. She carefully removed it, revealing the wall. Her fingers found a small imperfection, and with a click, a panel slid open, revealing a secret compartment. "Henry built this without anyone knowing, not even the architects," Beatrice explained. However, upon checking the interior, she found only empty space. Her face paled with despair. "We're too late. Russell must have found it first." Suddenly, footsteps approached down the corridor. In a panic, the two hid under the desk as the door opened. "Please don't let it be Russell," Lindsay thought, squeezing Beatrice's hand. A man's hand rested on the desk, so close Lindsay could see every detail of his fingernails. The silhouette of a man headed directly to the exposed compartment, while they remained motionless, knowing the slightest noise would mean the end of their mission. To their complete surprise, the figure who entered the office was neither Russell nor any of the guards, but a gray-haired gentleman with an elegant posture, dressed in an impeccable suit. Anthony, the former lawyer and close friend of the family, walked directly to the empty compartment without noticing the presence of the two women hidden under the heavy wooden desk. His countenance was grave, carrying the weight of someone executing a mission of extreme importance. "You can come out from under there. You don't need to hide from me," he said suddenly, without even turning. "Beatrice, I would recognize your lavender perfume anywhere, even after so many years." Beatrice slowly emerged from her hiding place, a mixture of relief and confusion on her wrinkled face. Lindsay followed hesitantly, still uncertain if they could trust this man, unknown to her but clearly familiar to the former maid. Anthony finally turned, a slight smile softening the seriousness of his expression when his eyes met Beatrice's. "Anthony, how did you know we would be here? And how did you get in without being noticed by the guards?" questioned Beatrice, nervously adjusting her coat, wrinkled from the uncomfortable position under the desk. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and observed Lindsay with interest before responding. There was an almost supernatural calmness in his presence, as if nothing could really surprise him. In his astute eyes, the intelligence of someone who is always several steps ahead of others was shining. Henry was much more meticulous than Russell ever imagined, he explained, pointing to the empty compartment. I removed the documents exactly 2 days ago, after receiving a letter programmed to be delivered if Dorothy didn't make contact for more than a week. A security plan that Henry and I developed together, anticipating precisely the scenario that unfolded. Lindsay stepped forward, the urgency of her mission momentarily overriding the discomfort of speaking to a stranger. Her voice betrayed the anxiety and concern she had carried since deciding to help Dorothy. So, you already know what happened to Mrs. Dorothy? You know she's in a precarious nursing home without her medications, practically abandoned to die? She asked, the words coming out in an emotional, difficult-to-contain flow. The doctor said she has only 1 week without proper medication, and every minute counts now. Anthony nodded gravely, extracting a cell phone from the inner pocket of his jacket. With precise gestures, he made a brief call, speaking in codes that seemed previously arranged with his interlocutor. After hanging up, he turned his attention to the two women, a new determination in his gaze. I've already initiated all necessary legal procedures. The real will, the one Russell never found, clearly stipulates that the fortune can only be managed by him if Dorothy is well cared for. Anthony explained, his voice acquiring the professional tone he probably used in court. Otherwise, absolutely everything goes to a foundation with Dorothy as president, and Russell completely disinherited, with no right to contest. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activities. From the office, the three went directly to the nursing home where they found Dorothy still unconscious, but under the vigilant care of Dr. Mitchell, who had done his best with the limited resources available. A private ambulance, previously called by Anthony, transported Dorothy to the best hospital in the city, where a specialized medical team was already waiting with specific medications for her fragile heart. Henry foresaw every detail. Beatrice commented to Lindsay as they observed Anthony talking with doctors and nurses in the hospital corridor. He knew Russell would eventually try something like this and prepared meticulously, protecting Dorothy even after his death. The dawn of the following day found Russell still asleep in his luxurious penthouse, Brittany by his side. The dream of a life of unlimited opulence, fueled by the newly acquired fortune and the illegal sale of the mansion, filled his thoughts even during sleep. His abrupt awakening came with the unmistakable sound of powerful engines breaking the morning silence. Intrigued and slightly irritated by the interruption, he got up and walked to the large window that offered a privileged view of the building's entrance. But what the hell is happening down there? He muttered, rubbing his eyes to make sure he wasn't still dreaming. What he saw made his blood freeze. 3 identical black cars, gleaming and imposing, were parking at that moment in front of the building. These weren't ordinary vehicles. They were high-luxury executive sedans, the type used by authorities or very high-ranking executives. They stopped in perfect sequence, creating an intimidating image that seemed taken from a movie about the mafia or federal agents. For a few seconds, nothing happened, as if the moment was suspended in time, increasing the tension that was already tightening Russell's chest. "Who are these people? What do they want here so early?" asked Brittany, approaching the window sleepily, and immediately awake upon seeing the unusual scene. Before Russell could respond, the door of the first car opened slowly. To his growing horror, from it emerged the familiar figure of Anthony, impeccably dressed in a dark suit and carrying a folder with what Russell instantly recognized as legal documents. The second car revealed 2 serious men in formal attire, court officers, no doubt, carrying what appeared to be warrants and summonses. It was, however, the occupant of the third car that made Russell stagger backward as if he had taken a physical blow. "It's not possible. No, it can't be," he stammered, his face rapidly paling. From the third black car emerged his mother, Dorothy, visibly stronger than when he had left her at the nursing home. Although still fragile, she was elegantly dressed, receiving support from Lindsay on one side, and from a man Russell recognized as a renowned private doctor on the other. There was a dignity in her posture, a renewed strength in her determined gaze, that completely contradicted the image of the confused and helpless old woman he had tried to create. How did she manage? Who helped her? Russell muttered, his mind working frantically to process what he was seeing and its devastating implications. Without wasting time, he hurriedly dressed and rushed to the elevator, ignoring Brittany's confused questioning. When the doors opened on the ground floor, he stormed through the lobby like a hurricane, determined to prevent the group from entering the building. Perhaps there was still time to create a convincing story, to manipulate the situation in his favor, as he had always done. What is the meaning of this invasion? Mother, what are you doing here? You should be resting in the nursing home under medical care, Russell said loudly as soon as he opened the entrance doors, trying to project indignation and filial concern for anyone who might be watching. Anthony stepped forward, extending an official document that Russell was forced to accept. His experienced gaze showed neither triumph nor satisfaction, just the serene certainty of someone who has executed justice long enough not to feel personal pleasure in its fulfillment. Russell, this is a court order immediately suspending the sale of the mansion, freezing all family bank accounts, and initiating an investigation for fraud, document forgery, and elder abuse, the lawyer announced in a formal tone, but loud enough to be heard by the doorman and some residents who were already beginning to gather, attracted by the commotion. I suggest you cooperate fully to minimize the legal consequences of your actions. As the court officers entered the building to execute the warrant, Dorothy slowly approached her son. The meeting of their gazes was like a silent duel. On one side, shock and growing panic. On the other, deep sadness mixed with unwavering determination. For a moment, the world around seemed to fall silent, as if everyone present recognized the importance of that confrontation between mother and son. You said I would die in that nursing home. Dorothy finally spoke, her voice soft, but perfectly audible in the tense silence. But your father always knew who you really were. The weeks that followed witnessed the complete transformation of circumstances. Dorothy, now recovered and receiving proper treatment in a luxurious private hospital room, was surrounded by a small team dedicated exclusively to her well-being. Color had returned to her cheeks, and although still fragile, she showed renewed vitality, fueled by the justice that had finally prevailed. Lindsay, I have no way to thank you enough for what you did for me, Dorothy said, affectionately holding the hands of the young nurse who visited her daily. Without your courage and determination, Russell's plan would have worked perfectly. Lindsay smiled, genuinely happy to see the recovery of the elderly woman who had so deeply touched her heart. What had begun as professional indignation had transformed into a genuine connection, a bond of affection that transcended the initial relationship. I only did what any person with conscience would do, Mrs. Dorothy, she responded modestly. You didn't deserve that cruel fate. Nobody does. Dorothy adjusted herself on the pillows, a determined expression momentarily replacing the gratitude in her gaze. She had made important decisions during her recovery, and one of them directly involved the young woman who had risked so much to save her. I'm establishing a foundation, exactly as Henry planned, to help elderly people in vulnerable situations, she announced, carefully observing Lindsay's reaction. And I would like you to accept a leadership position in it. No one better than you, who has seen up close the suffering of the abandoned, to help transform this reality. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Russell faced the devastating consequences of his actions. Evicted from his luxury apartment, now with all assets frozen by justice, he packed the few personal possessions he had left. Brittany, predictably, had abandoned him the instant she realized there would be no more access to the promised fortune. The loneliness of the nearly empty apartment perfectly reflected the moral emptiness that had always inhabited his heart. Mr. Russell, I have a summons for you, announced a court officer standing at the door, extending another official document. Mandatory appearance in court next week to answer charges of fraud and elder abuse. The conclusion of the story happened on an autumn afternoon, with the golden sun bathing the silent cemetery where Henry had been buried years before. Dorothy, now wearing an elegant dark blue outfit, walked slowly among the tombstones, supported by a cane and accompanied by Beatrice and Lindsay. In her arms, she carried a bouquet of red roses, her late husband's favorites. When they reached the simple yet elegant gravestone, Dorothy gently gestured, asking for a moment of privacy that was respectfully granted. "You always said our son had your talent for business, but not my heart," she murmured, placing the flowers on the cold marble. "Now I'll use your fortune to help abandoned elderly people like I almost was." A solitary tear slid down Dorothy's wrinkled face, falling on the gravestone as the sun began its descent on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. That moment marked not just the end of a story of betrayal and redemption, but the beginning of a new journey, one in which the pain of the past would be transformed into hope for many. "Thank you for foreseeing everything, my love," whispered Dorothy, gently touching the name engraved in the stone. "Even in absence, you still managed to protect me." The setting sun cast elongated shadows across the tombstones, creating a spectacle of light and darkness that seemed to perfectly symbolize the human journey, with its moments of despair and redemption, of falls and new beginnings. Dorothy took a deep breath, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The circle was complete. Justice had prevailed, and now it was time to look ahead, to the new purpose she had found amid adversity. "It's time to go," she called softly to Lindsay and Beatrice, who were waiting at a respectful distance. "We have much work ahead of us." As the three women slowly walked out of the cemetery, the last ray of sunlight briefly illuminated Henry's gravestone like a final farewell before night fell completely. The end of a day, the beginning of a new chapter. This story, it's just heartbreaking, isn't it? To imagine your own child, the one you loved and protected, turning on you so viciously. But then to see that spark of hope, that fight, and people stepping up to help. What do you think? Could you ever truly forgive someone who tried to do something so heinous, even if it was your own flesh and blood? Or would the betrayal be too deep? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear what you all make of Dorothy's incredible journey.